Okay folks, welcome back. Hope you had a nice break. The second half of the session begins now. Tony Eccles here, great guy, good friend and colleague of Bufora. He's been doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes with Bufora for many, many years. He's going to give you a good lecture today, Shamanism and the Close Encounter Witness. So please give a nice warm welcome to Tony Eccles.
Can everyone hear me okay? I don't have to shout, and you can see the screen okay? I'm going to read some notes. It's not the yellow pages, don't worry. It's going to be more of a dynamic topic. My presentation today focuses on the subject of shamanism, and if the subject has any value to the subject of ufology, in particular the close encounter experience. Is it possible that the UFO experience is a modern Western demonstration of shamanism, or indeed could the witness be fulfilling the role as a shaman? Similarities to shamanism is briefly mentioned in the UFO literature, but has rarely been explored to any depth. In Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, the late Harvard psychiatrist John Mack wrote, "There are peoples around the world who customarily communicate with non-human intelligences and spirits through a variety of means. These communications and the myths they generate are an integral part of the cosmologies of many non-Western cultures, constituting for each a kind of ontological skeleton upon which hangs the balance of culture, customs, and lifestyle. Throughout history, many societies have acknowledged consciousness as something more potent than we have in the West, as a sieve of receiver and transmitter communication with forces not always visible other than ourselves. The contemporary Western tenet that we are alone in the universe, conversant only with ourselves, is in fact a minority perspective, an anomaly." Mack highlights the point that we in the Western world have made ourselves different to everyone else. From the time of the Age of Enlightenment and the Age of Technology, it appears that the West has developed a superior philosophy or way of life, something we like to think of as progress, intellectually, technologically, even culturally. Perhaps this could offer us an explanation as to why normal, rational individuals are making claims that they have had vision-like experiences, alleged contacts with another apparent superior intelligence in advanced technological craft we regard as extraterrestrial. Through the witnesses' narrative, the ETs they encounter reveal a nature that is very much human. For example, asking witnesses for water, offering witnesses biscuits, and having a fascination with our bodies and sex. Mack informs us that alien abductions and the effects on abductees possess their own uniqueness. He describes the work of folklorist Peter Rogovich, who, through comparing the experiences of abductees with other aerial and abduction phenomena, alludes to the possibility that there's an intelligence behind UFO experiences and extraordinary encounters of all types, one that adapts its form and appearance to fit the environment of the times. In his conclusion, John Mack states that it needs to be stressed that we do not know if any of the above phenomena exist literally on the purely material plane of reality, despite the apparent physical manifestations. It could all be educational, a kind of mythic drama intended by a transcendent intelligence to move our being to a higher level. Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Dr. Jacques Vallée, the grandfathers of ufology, as we understand it, both comment on the strange behaviour of UFOs in the book The Edge of Reality. If UFOs are indeed somebody else's nuts and bolts hardware, then we will still explain how such tangible hardware can change shape before our eyes, vanish, seemingly melt away in front of us, or apparently materialise mysteriously before us without apparent detection by persons nearby or in neighbouring towns. We must wonder too where UFOs are hiding when not manifesting themselves to human eyes. Jacques Vallée in Passport to Magonia makes an intriguing revelation that the UFO occupants, like the elves of old, are not extraterrestrials, they're denizens of another reality. John Keel of the Mothman Prophecies fame offered his conclusion in 1967 that the evidence for extraterrestrial origin is purely circumstantial. He hinted in print that perhaps a more complex situation was involved. My talk is split into two parts. The first part is a general discussion on shamanism and how this is understood today. The second part explores the close encounter experience, and I'll be talking about two specific cases. A dictionary definition of shamanism is a religion of certain peoples of northern Asia based upon the belief that the world is pervaded by good and evil spirits, which can be influenced or controlled only by the shaman. The definition also states that it relates to any similar religion involving forms of spiritualism. Anthropologist Joy Hendry explains that the word shaman refers specifically to the Tungus tribe in Siberia, from where the word originates. The noun describes a specialist who has a soul, which can leave their body and travel to the heaven or an underworld. There they communicate with the spirits, and they return with clear memories of their experience. He has, therefore, a unique bond with the other world. This is a photograph of the Sangoma in Swaziland going through their initiation. It's like a party. There are different paths to becoming a shaman. One path entails an individual responding to an abrupt or obscure call, like the Sangoma in Swaziland. The invitation is perceived by the individual to be a sign, such as visions, hearing an inner voice, or seeing signs. Failure to respond to this call is often met with punishment in the form of misfortune, illness, even death. Acceptance often means that the calling spirit soon appears in some outward visible shape and communicates in a more explicit way. In weaker individuals, the calls will take the form of dreams. The second path relates to an individual inheriting a position in either the male or female line and is sometimes mandatory. The individual is aware that they had a history of experiences from a young age. This person is selected because it's believed they possess certain psychic qualities. This is an image of a Canibo girl from eastern Peru with her face decorated with geometric trance lines. The shaman goes into a trance, and in his vision he picks up the sacred anaconda, but it's an image that he picks up in his vision. And then he tells an artist about this vision, and they paint the face or they paint the ceramics. This girl was painted for the Pope's visit back in the early 2011. The third path is the yearning of an individual to follow a spiritual path. Initiation sees the transformation of an individual into a shaman, and this is often a long period of discomfort and incredible pain, which has the potential to last months, even years. Individuals tend to get the calling when they are young. In some Amazonian cultures, a shaman's power diminishes with age. And that sort of matches as well, if you're looking at data for close encounter cases, you tend to get a large set of data from people having these experiences who are in their 20s and 30s, early 40s, but then it sort of declines as they get into their 50s and 60s. Here we see a couple of clay vessels from the north coast of Peru. Both are stirrup spout vessels that were made by the Moche people around the 9th and 10th centuries AD. They depict the transformation of the shaman into an animal. One is an owl, which is on the left-hand side, and the other one is a seabird. I wanted to show you the owl, as owls are culturally powerful symbols in the West. They appear also to feature in a small number of UFO-related experiences. These vessels convey the belief that shamans had the ability to transform themselves, a means by which they entered the spirit world. At about this time period, ruling nobles were also considered sacred, and that they had direct access to the divine. Interestingly enough, wild cats, crabs, lobsters, reptiles, and snakes are also depicted on anthropomorphic transformations, because these creatures were viewed as liminal creatures in that they could travel between worlds, very similar to cats and dogs of other cultures. Again, powerful symbols that echo in the narratives of 17th century witch trials in this country, but also modern day UFO experiences. For example, the black dog that was viewed by Whitley Strieber on board the craft he allegedly was on. There is a strong religious association between these animals and beliefs in regeneration and the importance of rebirth within the cycle of life. Life and death are obvious forces that deeply affect our lives. Shamans act as mediators between the human world and the invisible world. They themselves are liminal practitioners. That is, they possess the ability to cross boundaries, and that's the important point to make here. They also have the gift to bring about change through their activities, change for the individual, and change for the social group they belong to. Engagement with spirits can be done by anyone, and is usually done at key points in a person's life. Initiates become transformed themselves, and they experience a life and a death. They are reborn into becoming a shaman. Shamans have purpose and meaning, and that they have to engage with spirits. They enter a trance to journey the spirit world with the aim of communicating with spirits, develop relationships with spirits, which includes knowing them by name and sometimes conducting sexual activity with them. Communication takes the form of channeling the power of the other world to benefit the community, and this is sometimes done via messages. Such benefit often means finding a cure to heal a person or even to cure someone, locating the causes of misfortune, the ability to divine, for example, to find lost things, and finally the ability to bring order in the form of messages, particularly during times of crisis. This can also bring a positive change in society. Their way of life includes fasting, living a life in isolation, sometimes displaying strange or unexplained behaviour, and reflection meditation. Larry Ellis, in his article Trickster, Shaman of the Liminal, tells us from his knowledge of Native American culture that a shaman is a valued and essential member of the tribe, but to some degree will always remain the outsider, powerful, unpredictable, and incomprehensible. He draws his power from the realm of the liminal, wielding it in a manner that parodies the significance of what he accomplishes. We can look at contactees who are ridiculed through society, but they believe they carry an important message. Writing for the Journal of African Studies in 1997, Young Lewis describes shamanism as a traditional spirit-based diagnostician, healer, and ritual expert who is a specialist in religious ecstasy. He goes on to explain that the use of the term shaman outside its original Siberian context is by no means unproblematic. Consequently, the extent to which shamanism represents a universal religious phenomenon or set of phenomena is a matter for debate. This debate continues to this day, and the dictionary definition of shamanism is incorrect. It's not a universal religion. Shamanism is practiced as an act universally, but not as a religion. And that's important to bear in mind when looking at close encounter experiences. We must not make the mistake of expecting to find like for like in other cultures, but experiences that draw out important parallels. In 19th century Central Africa, the Nganga was one such individual, today referred to by museum ethnographers like myself as a ritual specialist, and this is one such person here. This was actually taken in 1908 in the French Congo. In South Africa, these people are known as Sangoma. The Baffin Island Inuit have someone called the Angakut. In Peru and Ecuador rainforest, we have the Uishin. Interestingly enough, in Japan, the female shaman is called Fujo and is divided into two kinds of specialists. People who are blind are normally associated with communication with the dead, and those who have sight normally interact with divine spirits called kami. And in the Japanese language today, the word kami is incorporated into the word for Holy Spirit in the Christian doctrine. During the, cultural names aside, their roles are strikingly similar, and I will continue using the term shaman because we all understand it here. I would prefer, however, to use the word mediator, but this reminds me of hostage abduction negotiations and relationship counselling, so I'm not going to use it. Our understanding of the shaman is really only a recent development. Historically, the shaman of the 16th and 17th centuries was treated in much the same way as those of witchcraft and devil worship, and often met a similar fate. During the 18th century, through the Age of Enlightenment, and despite the interest in the occult by certain movements, shamans were viewed with suspicion as superstitious jugglers, conjurers, tricksters who did nothing but deceive the ill with magical tricks for their own gain. Observers still had difficulties understanding them. It wasn't until the late 19th, 20th century that anthropologists had actually understood their purpose and role in society through participant observation. In 1946, S.F. Nadel made numerous observations amongst the Nuba peoples of the Sudan and used the term shaman to translate the vernacular Niamey term kujo, which he reports applied to describe spirit-inspired priests who divine the future and diagnose and treat illness at seances while they're in a state of trance. The spirits concerned are anthropomorphic. They are human-like in appearance. They come to the shaman from outside, and when he is in a trance, gain hold of his body. In trance, the spirit mounts the shaman as a rider does a horse and enters his head. Nadel was able to contend that the Sudanese cult was equivalent to classical shamanism in Central Asia and Northwest America. It rests on the belief that spirits may possess human beings and onto the practice of establishing communication with the supernatural through human beings so possessed. The person possessed is more than merely a temporary and passive medium through which others place themselves in rapport with the spirit world. Finally, Dr. Audrey Coulson lived with the Akawao people in British Guyana, and she tells us that the spirits who inhabit a shaman's body also assist with social-making decisions. These decisions would frequently reflect public opinion, concerns, and anxieties, and it's another valid point when you think about close encounter experiences or contactees where they bring back messages, warning of the apocalypse, destruction of the world with atomic bombs, or destruction of the environment. Similar sort of thing. It's trying to restore a balance to the seeming chaos that runs through the world. So shamans exist in an animistic world where spirits are everywhere, but are sometimes considered the souls of the deceased and real entities. For example, the Australian Aborigines believe in the tiny Nini spirit, which hides from people, but from time to time comes out of rocks to forage for food. These are ancestral figures from the village of Chitral in Afghanistan. Sometimes spirits relate to deceased family members, such as these figures here, who protect settlements. These existed within old Afghanistan at a time prior to forced conversion to Islam by the ruling Meta. These ancestral spirits were sacred to every village and would be suspended by posts outside the village entrance to ward off intruders. And speaking of Islam, I was informed by a colleague many years ago that in the Middle East, a strange light in the sky would be perceived as a jinn or evil spirit. In Nigeria, the ancestral spirits are revered and offered libations and sacrifices in return for protection or guidance. In the Amazon rainforest, as one can imagine, the spirits take the form of birds, amphibians, lizards, but also take human form and relate to ancestors long deceased. Despite appearances, almost every culture acknowledges a real relationship with the spirit world, as this ensures new birth and regeneration after death. The modern Western world is the exception. Instead, we have aliens in spacecraft. Perhaps this is our version of the spirit world, but we fail to recognize it. Cultural perception of anomalies plays a big part in how we interpret experiences. And I recommend reading texts by researchers like John Spencer, who do quite a lot of work talking about perception problems. The Unsuri Swa, who live, that are forest people living in the border between Ecuador and Peru, and they believe that life and death is dependent upon negotiating the invisible forces that surround us. The spirit world empowers them, it gives them status, it gives them meaning. They have a purpose in life. Close encounter witnesses don't have those things. In fact, they frequently, and I'm talking about shamans here, in fact, the Shwa frequently go in search of souls because without them they believe they would die. Their worldview is a fascinating one in that they see the normal waking state as a lie. To them, it's not reality. In fact, they believe that by entering the spirit world, they see and experience the real world. Events that are initiated there have a great impact on the waking world. However, they also believe that to get there, one has to enter a trance state. And this is done in the Amazon by taking hallucinogens. I must stress here that not every culture uses hallucinogens. Many of them enter a trance state by fasting, drumming, dancing, and singing. A Western comparison would be a young person going to a nightclub, a rave, dancing the night away to the likes of drum and bass. It is the vibration they feel that takes them into an altered state of consciousness. And very often young people come away with a sense of great elation. As a master of spirits, the shaman with experience should be able to do this at will. In other words, they can willingly enter the spirit world when they want to, but there will be occasions when they are forced to enter the spirit world through no choice of their own. This is a shaman's rattle by Northwest Coast artist Joe David, and it's shaman's rattle. One side depicts a human, the other side depicts the spirit of another. Some anthropologists have experienced the trans-state for themselves and reported on these observations. I've not been lucky enough to do it, but I will. One example comes from Everardin Fern, who was living with the Mukushi at the beginning of the 20th century in British Guyana. And whilst understanding the techniques and trickery involved, as he describes it, he could hear the drumming and the voice impersonations, and he was actually aware that he was being taken into a trance state and actually felt some form of ascension. He just was taken to a place he didn't recognize, but afterwards he walked out into a storm, and he said that he felt completely aware of the environment. He felt very different. Everything felt totally alive. There's no drug taking involved in that. American anthropologist Michael Parner, however, conducted a lot of field work with the Unsuri Shwa, and through his seminal work, the Ivaro, he tells us that the Shwa believe that there are three types of soul, namely the Arutam Wakani, which is the acquired soul, and they believe that a man can possess only two souls at one time, but the power is cumulative. You start losing souls as well. And they believe that the second soul is called the Wisak, or the vengeance soul. If you are ritually murdered, your spirit will actually turn vengeful and try to kill the person who killed you or their family. So that's where you get shrunken heads. Shrunken heads are made to trap the avenging spirit, hoping to appease them, to send them back to their home so that they can be reborn again. The third soul is the Nekas Wakani, which is the ordinary soul. Acquiring a soul can be obtained by any man or woman. In a patrilineal society like the Shwa, it is the men who feel the need to go on vision quests, as it empowers them. It's relevant to note here that entities in some of the more profound close encounter experiences talk to witnesses about the importance of souls and also the subject of death, in some cases seeing apparitions of the deceased they knew. The Arutam Wakani is the most important soul. In their language, Arutam relates to a particular kind of vision or apparition, and the Wakani bit means soul. According to anthropologist Michael Parner, Arutam Wakani is the ancient spectre soul, which is often seen as a ball of light. This soul is believed to produce a vision, and when it does appear, does so only briefly to the witness. The Arutam soul exists eternally once it is created. Whilst the accumulation of soul energy is important, souls will often leave the bodies of individuals to go in search of those who need them most. Therefore, whilst the soul is eternal, it never stays long in any one person. It will either wander or be stolen. Within Shwa cosmology, it is the Arutam soul that permits the Shwa to seek security from death. They believe that any who possesses such a spirit cannot be killed by any natural form of physical violence, poison, or by sorcery. A person possessing two souls cannot be killed at all. If someone is killed in combat, it is believed that they died because they lost their soul. There are numerous occasions when a soul is to be sought. I'm just going to name one of them here, and it's to do with young lads who are taken by their fathers into the forest. And what they do is they go to a sacred waterfall because it's believed that souls gather there. And they immerse themselves in this freezing cold water, and then they camp for 5 nights. And what happens is that the father gives the boy a bit of tobacco water in the hope that he will actually be able to experience a vision. If he doesn't, they'll go home and they'll plan another expedition. But sometimes for those who return, they actually do take a drug. And there are a number that they drink, but the most potent is natama. And it's a vine, similar to ayahuasca in a sense. And they go off into the woods in search of the soul. It's very often that the soul becomes a ball of light, and they have to reach out and touch it. Now, the soul won't enter them if they show any signs of cowardice. So the boy has to go forward and touch it. Now, he's not meant to tell his father this. He'll go back home, and he'll have a dream. And in his dream, he'll encounter the ancient ancestor who will talk to him and said, I will give you my power. You have the power to kill. You have the power to do this, this, this. And what happens, you see a transformation, that the boy starts to grow up there. The next day, he comes out and he feels he is empowered by the Spirit. He gains status. He feels that he has more confidence because he has met the Spirit. And he doesn't tell anybody in the encounter until the tribe go off, if they're fighting. Before they actually have a fight, they'll talk about the souls they've encountered. Now, Michael Parner, as typical of any anthropologist, actually wants to have such an experience. He writes that whilst he lived with the Canebo people in Peru between 1957 and 61, he had two experiences that opened his eyes to shamanism. He found that people were friendly, but they were very reluctant to talk about the supernatural. And after a while, they told him that if he really wanted to know about the world, then he should really take ayahuasca, otherwise known as the soul vine and the little death. The next day he had to fast, and later at sunset he was allowed to take this sacred drink. He lay down on a bamboo platform in a communal house, and with the exception of animals in the distance, he was surrounded by silence. His visions began with strange bright lights appearing, and he could hear once distant sounds. They become very, very close to him. He then felt numb, and all about him was dark. He describes the scene around him as a celestial cavern, because of the bright violet hues, and then he could see some dim figures engaged in shadowy movements. In the centre of the room he was there, and in stood a gigantic crocodilian head with torrential waters coming out of its massive jaws. The water level rose, and the scene then changed into a place of blue, sky above, sea below. And this is just an interpretation, obviously. He soon began to see strange boats, wafting back and forth, floating through the air, coming towards him, getting closer and closer, until he could discern them as a giant Viking galley. Accompanying this was the most beautiful singing, high-pitched and ethereal, emanating from voices on board the galley. When he himself was on board, he could see several hundred humanoid-like people with bird-headed faces, similar to the deity paintings of ancient Egypt. He was convinced that he was dying, and that these people had come to take his soul away. As his soul was leaving his body, he could feel numbness in his body. He couldn't move at all. According to Parner, it felt like his body was turning to concrete. As the numbness affected his chest, he could not move or speak. He was unable to ask the people around him for help in the form of an antidote. He was told by the people on the boat that because he was dying, it was safe for him to receive visions and information. These were the secrets reserved for the dying and the dead. The givers of this information were giant reptilian creatures that he could vaguely see in the gloomy dark depths of the back of his mind. They then projected a visual scene in front of him. First they showed him the planet Earth, as it was aeons ago, before there was any life on it. He could see oceans, barren land and a bright blue sky. Then he saw black specks dropping from the sky in their hundreds, winged black creatures that flocked to the earth, utterly exhausted from their trip, and they explained to him in a kind of thought language that they were fleeing from something out in space. They had come to Earth to escape their enemy, very much like the Close Encounter experience in certain abductee narratives as well. The creatures then showed him how they created life on the planet in order to hide themselves amongst the other life forms there. He learned that the dragon-like creatures were thus inside of all forms of life, including man. They were the true masters of humanity and the entire planet. We humans were but the receptacles and servants of these creatures. He felt that these dragon-like creatures felt increasingly alien and possibly evil, and that they were about to take his soul and his life. Parner managed to cry out for medicine, received the antidote, and eventually came out of his trance state. The visions disappeared. Symbolically, the images and the patterns, even the messages of his experience, sound very much like the Close Encounter experiences, even like abductee narratives. Granted, many abductees tell us that their experiences with aliens take place aboard a spacecraft, but how do we know that this isn't a symbol their minds have absorbed culturally, so that the experience could take on a more relevant meaning for them? Surely the experience is meant to incorporate symbols that relate directly to a person's background and society. For example, if an abductee encounters giant talking snakes in a forest, their experience may not have as much meaning for them. They may not even be called abductees. They may not consider their encounter to convey a message that has any meaning for them or for society as a whole. Parner has never expressed any interest or knowledge of ufology, especially in his fieldwork in the 50s and 60s, where he was very much aware of the ancient cultural mythologies of Egypt and Scandinavia. So this imagery has come into the subconscious, and I'm sure that very much we absorb so much information in our lives as well that comes out through various visions that we may have. Parner says, in retrospect, he said, one could say that they were almost like DNA, and he's talking about the little bits little black bits that are falling out of the sky. Although at the time in 1961 I knew nothing of DNA. Now that he's had this experience with the aid of hallucinogens, there are a number of similar accounts with shamans who recall their encounters, especially when it's clear that good and evil spirits seem to fight over humankind, but it's the shaman who has these encounters via a non-drug induced trance state. It has been said by some ufologists that what other cultures are experiencing could be regular communication with extraterrestrials, but perceiving them in a way that only they can understand. This somehow demonstrates that extraterrestrials have been in contact with humankind since the very beginning. If that's the case, then 3/4 of the world's population is being deceived because they do not interpret them as ET, but more divine. It's true that many cultures will not see alien craft, but instead will interpret an anomaly as something perfectly acceptable within the framework of their cultural beliefs. According to F.W. Buck Thompson, in West African Secret Societies published in 1929, the witches of northern Ghana are often seen flying in the sky late at night in the form of balls of fire, or the spirits of the dead are visible as a slight glow seen in the night. If the cultural framework is the system by which we perceive or interpret the phenomena, then perhaps the various UFO shapes being reported, for example the flying saucer, the flying triangle, the cigar shape, are symbols that relate specifically to our own culture. In this way, the experience and the symbols relating to it might have meaning for the experiencer. Perhaps then we can understand the UFO as a shamanic event, possibly as a vision, possibly as an agent of change. The Western world, of course, does have its fair share of people who claim to have a special ability to connect to the invisible world. They vary widely, including those labelled as spiritualist mediums, contactees, abductees, followers of the Aetherius Society, and a whole plethora of New Age beliefs that are promoted throughout the UK. I do heartily recommend one text, and that is Emma Wilby's 2005 work, Cunning Folk and Familiar Spirits, Shamanistic Visionary Traditions in Early Modern British Witchcraft and Magic. Despite science and technology, Western culture is historically rich in cultural tradition and folklore. Now I go to the close encounter experience. The term close encounter is an idea originating with Valet and Hynek for classifying an experience. I understand the term to mean an aerial anomaly which is visible and is in close proximity to an observer. There might be communication, interaction, even the appearance of occupants. The experience sometimes involves observer isolation, what we call the Oz factor, and intelligent-like behavior displayed by the anomaly and the occupants. The experience is so far removed from the observer's reality that it is sometimes difficult to comprehend. In his book UFOs, Operation Trojan Horse, John Keel asked, how do you investigate something that doesn't exist? The answer, he claimed, is that you investigate and study the person who has experienced these things. You don't investigate them by checking their reliability, as John Allen Hynek himself did. You study the medical and psychological effects of their experiences. This cannot be done by teenagers with telescopes or housewives with tape recorders. It must be done by trained professionals. Investigations into UFO sightings traditionally place a particular focus on the anonymous object. Investigations are sometimes led by the personal beliefs of the investigator. Only a small part of the inquiry is given to those people we call witnesses. I want to mention Close Encounter witness Elsie Oakenson, for example, whose UFO experience led her to change direction in life and actively take up spiritual healing. Oakenson herself felt that she and many other witnesses were regularly being squeezed into other people's theories. UFO investigations have at times involved the need to include specialists in scientific fields such as astronomy, biology, physics, meteorology, psychology, etc. But the interpretation of such information has often been produced by unqualified amateurs. Finally, whilst there are forums for discussion, raw case data is rarely seen by the public for the purpose of closer scrutiny. This slide, for example, is just taken from Merseyside over a 10-year period. These relate to cases I've looked into myself. In 1972, the late astronomer, Dr. J. Allen Hynek, consultant to the US Air Force's Project Sign, Grudge and Blue Book, and the father of ufology with Jacques Vallée, wrote, "Though it can't be explained yet, the UFO experience has every semblance of being a real event to the UFO reporter and his companions, and that's our starting point. The UFO reporter is our data-gathering instrument. Data and data gathering are important elements in understanding the subject, so long as the right questions are being asked. In the last 60 years, the focus has either been on the subject on the UFO object itself, or in the hypnosis narratives gleaned from the abduction experiences. I do feel that the person who reports their experience has been squeezed into someone else's theory, and that little appropriate attention has been given to the witness. As investigations into a close encounter should take into account not just the observed anomaly, but also the witness, their environment, even their lives. This perspective might reveal something a little more interesting. Here are a couple of old cases I've investigated myself." Very exciting picture. In Liverpool in 1994, Mike, this is a friend of mine, a local government officer in his late 20s, survived a serious car crash. He was lucky to have been able to walk out of the wreckage. His knee was seriously injured. He was also traumatized by the event, and in the days that followed, he lost his confidence, refused to get back into a car and drive, and people do that, don't they? The emotional and physical symptoms he was displaying were diagnosed by his GP as he was suffering with depression and anxiety, and he was prescribed a low dose of fluoxetine hydrochloride, Prozac, but no counselling was sought. It even affected his daily working life in the City Council's benefits office. He was transferred temporarily to another department doing light work until he felt he was able to return. However, no matter how much he tried, he didn't want to continue working there. Mike wanted to move on. He'd been successful in his job since he'd left school and had been promoted a couple of times, but he wasn't happy with his circumstances at work. At home, he was still living with his parents, and that was seen as a clear opportunity for him to develop his savings. Prior to the car crash, Mike had major surgery performed on his knee. The crash had caused him sufficient pain. His doctor recommended physiotherapy to help him, and he did this by taking up Tai Chi. Mike wasn't happy, but the Tai Chi allowed him to start building up his confidence again. As part of his daily routine, though, he would walk his dog, and he'd do this in the evening. The circular route was along Moston Avenue and Ramsey Road, and just after midnight on the 4th of August, he took his excited dog out and started walking down the lamplit road. The route would take him through familiar territory, and wherever there was a clear night, he took comfort in looking at the night sky. On this particular night, something drew his attention to the roof of a neighbouring house. Above the roof hovered a large, bright red ball of light. He had never seen anything like this before, and he stopped and stared at it. He observed that the ball made no noise, but was pulsating from right to left, organic light. He watched it for at least a minute, but he was suddenly distracted by his dog happily sniffing around someone else's front garden. Mike looked down and called his dog. When he looked up again, the object had vanished from sight. Not a very spectacular UFO sighting, is it? No fog, no strange occupants, just a ball of light that appeared very close to the witness. How I wanted a simple example of what I think is an act of shamanism in which an observer can actually benefit from having a UFO sighting. Mike continues walking the dog, but this time he's looking for the object and it doesn't reappear. He went home completely puzzled by what he'd seen, to the extent that he needed to know what it was. This is where I came in. He contacted me. I'd been his friend for 10 years. I looked into the event and tried to find a rational explanation. Perhaps there was a mundane source, something to just offer an explanation, something rational, but I couldn't find any. There was a geological fault line 600 metres to the west, so could fault line activity be responsible for sighting? Don't know. How about hallucinations caused by temporal lobe activity? This wasn't an avenue of inquiry I was qualified to follow. Equally puzzled, I continued interviewing him about his experience, even asked him questions using Albert Budden's electrohypersensitivity questionnaire, spoke to him about his life. The conclusion I came to didn't come to me immediately, but some months later. Mike had experienced other phenomena, because we always ask witnesses, well, have you experienced paranormal phenomena? We need to have a larger section in regards to this, I think, on the form. The examples he gave me, for example, he would be lying in bed at night when he could feel the paws of a cat sink into the mattress as it approached him, but he didn't have a cat. At other times when lying in bed, he could feel a dark presence in his room. This would sometimes be accompanied by pressure on his body, even a failure to move at all. He'd even seen a white face appear close to his own face and hiss at him threateningly. His struggle with this force was eventually broken by a bout of swearing. Old hag syndrome and sleep paralysis were obviously correct analyses for these experiences. However, Mike also informed me that apparently as a baby in his mother's womb, the umbilical cord had wrapped itself tightly around his neck, almost killing him. As a young boy, his uncle had abused him, sexually abused him. He had grown into a sensible, mature, intelligent young man with a passion for art. Very intelligent, but chose not to go to university, but instead found himself in a steady, well-paid job with the local authority. Are any of these details important to the case? Does personality and life experience enable a person to be prone to anomalous activity? I think it's an important part of the puzzle, and it's worthy of further exploration. From the time of his sighting, he felt excitement again for life. He finished his course of antidepressants, but didn't want a repeat prescription. His Tai Chi enabled him to strengthen his body. He did get back into his car, and he did start driving again. You might relate this, you might call it coincidence, perhaps. We're talking a couple of weeks here, not months. He then decided that he needed a change of employment, and decided to become a travel rep. The money wasn't as much as he was earning then, but it meant a change of environment. He regained his confidence and applied for a position with 5 different tour companies, of which all 5 of them wanted to employ him. He was clearly on the path to recovery. To be honest, the strange ball of light was not of interest to me, but more the profound effect his observation had on him at the time, where his life needed change. It doesn't really matter if the ball of light was caused naturally, or if it was an apparition or vision. I believe that Mike's mystery red light was something induced somehow by his own mind to stimulate healing. I see this as a possible shamanic act, in that Mike was mediating with another form of reality, so to speak. The encounter gave him meaning and actually empowered him. When dealing with UFO sightings, there will be occasions when we must ask ourselves, does the appearance of an anomaly have a purpose? Does it have a function? Is it for anyone's benefit? To accept this then, one must accept that in these exotic cases, there is an intelligence behind them. The first thing to mention is that somehow the observer is attracted to the anomaly. Somehow they just look up for no apparent reason. The anomaly then holds the observer's attention for a while, as if to inform them that the specific moment has become part of their reality. Second case. In 1995, I was a member of the Northern Anomalies Research Organisation, which is based in Manchester, and I was asked by lead investigator Alicia Lee to participate in what was to become known as the Robert Shaw case, which is based in Ernston. The case has come to the group's attention 9 months after the event had allegedly happened. On Christmas night, The witness is a postman at this time, by the way. On Christmas night in 1994, just after 9:30 p.m, Harvey was watching television. He was waiting for a taxi to take him to his sister's house for the festive celebrations. Outside, through the window, in an area close to his first floor flat, he observed the formation of 5 large red lights in a vertical column slowly descend to the ground below treetop level there. Harvey felt transfixed and drawn to them. He found the lights to be incredibly beautiful. Harvey got up, put his coat on, ventured outside to get a better look. He bumped into a couple of friends, but he left them to find the source of the lights. He walked into the wooded area, but stopped because he felt what he called primeval fear, and that something was wrong, and he shouldn't have been there. He gave into the emotion and turned back. I've given away the witness's name there. His name's Harvey, doesn't matter, you're not going to know who he is. Harvey didn't remember what happened next. In fact, he woke up next morning in bed with his clothes still on. He didn't remember a thing about the previous evening. Doesn't remember the taxi turning up to pick him up, and doesn't remember what his sister Claire had told me. She called him to find out why he hadn't turned up. He answered the phone, but he wasn't being his normal self in any way. It seemed strikingly odd that Harvey had picked up the phone whilst he was still undergoing his experience. The next morning, he takes a neighbour to the wooded area where they found a muddy patch in the centre where the reeds had unusually been pushed flat to the ground. They didn't look right as they were covered with a thin black substance. He describes it having a different texture and was bone dry, which was peculiar as it had been raining crisp day and night. This is the area. The on-site investigation was flawed from the start. We wanted to analyse the soil, analyse the trees as the bark at a certain height consists of burn marks. But this was being done 9 months after the event and too late to get me serious data that could perhaps show that an anomalous object had damaged the organic matter in the area. It was a pointless exercise conducted by, in great part, the enthusiasm of amateurs for wanting to get to the bottom of the experience, and our complete naivety in failing to understand how time plays a crucial part in an investigation. Alice and I interviewed him in September, and he told us that even several months after the event he felt angry, irritated and miserable. Harvey was a fairly good illustrator. He enjoyed painting as a hobby, and he felt compelled to draw something that reflected his experience. His first drawing, Harvey told me, consisted of the aliens called Greys. He was aware of the image prior to his experience. The picture did nothing for him, so he tore it up. However, the second picture he drew made more sense to him. It shows a central column covered in branches and leaves with little alien fellows at its base. The aliens, he felt, were not important to the experience, but the column was. With hindsight, we can look at the picture and see the column for what it is, a symbol of historical strength and the beginnings, and the branches and leaves suggest life. Unfortunately, in October that year, Harvey was hypnotically regressed by an author and a hypnotherapist. I have a copy of the transcript with me. This was an unfortunate step to take. For me, Harvey's experience sounds more like an altered state of consciousness, possibly relating to hypnagogic vision. So I ask, what is the point of putting someone in an altered state of consciousness, i.e. hypnosis, to remember something that happened in an altered state of consciousness? It just doesn't make any sense. And this logic can also be applied to anomalistic experiences that take place when someone is in bed. Logically speaking, if people go to bed to sleep, then surely their experiences is likely to reflect visions created via a sleep state. Unfortunately, the further years of UFO sightings of the 80s and 90s were special because they were leading up to the millennium and the fears and anxieties of societies associated with it. Even Harvey had told me that the hypnosis meant nothing. In the transcript, Harvey reports seeing bright lights and angelic beings, which he is pushed to describe. In fact, the only useful piece of information gleaned from hypnosis was his response to the question, "What do you mean things have been bad?" His answer is, "Well, it's kind of the usual stuff, girlfriends. I feel slightly trapped. I guess in the flat or tied to the flat. there was also his job, which he wanted to leave. His personal anxieties were a cause for concern and hardly required change in his life, and as a result, he did make several changes, but this was only a month or two after he had the experience. The questioners also pushed Harvey into telling them information he had been told by the intelligence behind the UFO, information he shouldn't be talking about to anyone else because it's a secret. If anything, the information was being obtained not to help the witness, but the questioner's own agenda. We seem to have a problem with the idea that visions are dreamlike, and as conscious individuals, we would know the difference between reality when we're awake and the reality of a dream state. The fact remains that people cannot tell the difference. Much in the same way as ghost stories are told when a witness is telling you that the person that they have just spoken to suddenly dematerialized. It's exactly the same with some UFO cases. They might look physically real, but the whole event has probably taken place between our world and another world, or as we come to know, the Oz factor. If we are to solve one part of the UFO mystery, then we need to start asking relevant questions about witnesses. In the early 1980s, before investigator Ken Phillips and meteorologist, environmental psychologist Dr. Alex Kuehl spent a great deal of time focusing on the witness and their life history, hence the word anamnesis, which means life memory. This project had produced some interesting results. It would be worthwhile starting a witness study of this sort again, so that we can obtain more data that would be useful in allowing us to understand what is happening. In fact, if we have a look at this information here, this is some of the case data that Ken Phillips produced. That's a section called Change in Life After Observation. And what it says is 10 out of 15 witnesses need a change in their life. Compared that to another study group who were more psychic orientated, which was just 4 out of 15. But when it came to the control group of 10 people, those people were very different. In fact, they didn't want any change. They were happy with their life circumstances. It's what we call, it's what D.I. Warren called, psychologists called status inconsistency. As an investigator, when listening to witnesses, they tell me their experiences, the most frustrating part of it was not being able to answer the following questions. Why me? Why do I have to go through this? And what does this all mean? Perhaps with a more appropriate study of the witness, I will be able to answer those questions more appropriately. Perhaps I will be able to offer assurance by telling them about the role and the purpose of the modern day shaman. Perhaps then will they feel normal and have something of value to offer society. Thank you very much for being patient with me.
Thank you, Tony. I've learned a lot about my knowledge of that subject is very scarce, but very important. Thank you very much. Question and answer time, ladies and gentlemen. Has anybody got a question? Did you have one? I'll come back in a second.
Thanks for a great talk, Tony. More of just a sort of little very short story just to illustrate what you're talking about. A friend of mine from Brazil has spent his life as an ayahuasquero, so acting as a healer and shaman with ayahuasca. He's been doing this for 20 odd years now. But when he was last in England, we got chatting, and he told me that as an ayahuasquero, when you're preparing your brew, you're also using it, so he'll be effectively sort of tripping for weeks on end, lucky him. But during one of these sessions, he was in his workshop brewing this up, and basically had a moment where he felt that there was a shift from that visionary experiences started to appear in what he felt was his reality. And if you're a regular drinker of ayahuasca, you're very clear about what's vision and what's quotidian reality. Anyway, he felt there was this penetration, and it took the form of a red crystal hovering in his workshop, which suddenly started opening up. and sort of unraveling all this red kind of viney, gunky kind of material all through the workshop, and it obviously freaked him out. So he went to see his teacher, who was an older Brazilian shaman, who then said, well, they finally, to smile at him and said, they finally revealed themselves to you. And my friend said, what do you mean? And the elderly shaman just began to tell him this whole narrative about extraterrestrial visitation and how the aliens had come here long ago and planted their seeds, and we had evolved from the seeds. And what I take from this really is that the sort of extraterrestrial metaphor, extraterrestrial myth, which I see really as a North American narrative, has begun to pervade deep into shamanic cultures, which is interesting and not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but interesting. But I think it could get increasingly confusing as people try to take apart the roots of these kinds of traditions and all of those sort of syncretic. Cross-pollination becomes more and more spreads further and further into these cultures.
Well, mythological narratives will change over time anyway, reflect on the nature of society. And the great thing about the Western world is you've got technological feats that are present, and so one would expect to see them in our narrative as well. So,
just something I'd like to just share with you. I didn't expect anything like this today, by the way. I've never heard anything about this before, but a couple of months ago some friends gave me a book, it's about 50 years old, and I'm just reading it because I'm interested in the main character, Maud Nelson. She had the same sort of experience. I was literally gobsmacked to read it in print at 50 years old. Really thick book out of the library at Barrow-in-Furness. And it's completely so annoyed. He was going through a really low patch in his life. Injured, I think he had malaria, something like that, hadn't achieved anything, getting really frustrated. He saw this thing and he said from that moment, he had no doubts at all about what he was going to do. I didn't know whether you'd heard of that.
No, I'm sorry, no, not at all. It's interesting because it sort of reminds me of what Carl Jung is talking about, the collective unconsciousness. Maybe we're tapping into something that's shared and tapped into by everybody at different. And not only that, but what the red ball would mean as a symbol. The flying saucer is a potent symbol, but we tend to see in the sort of latter years of the 20th century the balls of light. And maybe because red is also a very powerful colour, life-giving energy, associations with blood as well. Maybe that's something to do with it. I don't know.
Okay. Mr. Begley, the man has been to Area 51. What's your comments?
Hello there. Yeah, my question is, you mentioned John Mack. Is there any other scientists taking that, leading from his part of work, like in psychiatry, as you mentioned, people just end up on drugs and then they end up instituted. And I feel there needs to be this sort of work is important.
I think that's a good question to answer. I'm sure there are plenty of soft science scientists who are interested in this phenomenon, but I couldn't find. Okay, I'll confess, I spent the last 6 months doing a bit of research for this talk, but I was going to JetStore and pulling up wherever academic articles I could find, wherever I could find. And a lot of them were mainly anthropological, some of them were psychological, but not many of them are new. I mean, a lot of the articles are found dated to the late 90s. And I think some psychologists actually gave up as well because they thought, well, temporal lobe epilepsy, sleep paralysis, that's it, done and dusted. But I do think that some people don't see it like that. I think there are some psychologists who are quite interested in looking at the UFO phenomenon in this respect. But I haven't come across them just yet. But it could be, I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're there. I'll find them eventually.
Okay, this is the last question before the break, but Tony will be available during the break if any of you have got any further questions.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is the last question.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Bit of a teaser, that, wasn't it?
Hi Tony, brilliant talk there. You concentrated as well on the aspect of concentrating on the witnesses to get the full picture from the psychological viewpoint, their lives, etc. Obviously we had a chat earlier and that's very important to me. What dangers do you see in the layperson, as it were, i.e. not a doctor, no qualifications in psychiatry, psychology, etc., assessing the witness from that angle? For example, the ethical implications and what kind of things do you see to be put in place so that investigators, be it paranormal investigators concentrating on UFOs or various paranormal events, what procedures can you see kind of being put in place to help investigators concentrate on those areas but not overdo what they're actually qualified to do?
That's the easy question for last, didn't you? There are many dangers, and I'll be honest, I'm never one to sort of shy away from honesty. I was looking through the Bufora archive, and Heather will know where we took home sort of boxes of cases. And I was looking through some of the archives, some of the old Bufora cases, which weren't conducted properly, and they were conducted with the belief system of the investigator. So one of the things we have that's a problem is the belief system of the investigator or the researcher, who will speak to a witness and say, what's happened to you is this, you've been abducted, and they go through the narrative, and because there are many parallels between them and another person, they'll accept that, but it may not be the truth. Then, of course, there's the problem of hypnosis. And I've actually seen a former investigator who was hypnotized become sick. Do you remember Penny Hoyt, Heather? She was hypnotized to try and recall memories. And I was horrified. And I was there. And I was horrified. And I saw her physically sick through the hypnosis. We don't have a set of ethics. I mean, we have a moratorium on Bufora. And we're very concerned about ethical behaviour of investigators. I know we've spoken about ethics before. I think it's very important to have not just a code of conduct, but also a set of ethics as to how one should conduct an interview, an investigation, and how one should research the subject. From the very beginning, I was very lucky to be with a friend of mine called Mark Glover, who was a qualified psychiatric nurse. And he would say, okay, well, we can speak to Dr. Stephen Verner-Weaver, Dr. Carl Williams. We had psychologists, and we're very fortunate in this, to have what Becky call parapsychologists. And we would often bring them with us to meet the witnesses. A lot of groups don't have that, or don't even think about engaging with the medical profession to ask for advice. In fact, I think that some investigators don't actually know where to go for the information except to other ufologists. So I think what we lack is like a knowledge bank of where to go and who to speak to. And I think training is a crucial part, because the good investigator is someone who is aware of the different routes to take. And of course, when I received the case, because I used to do poltergeist cases as well, there was a gentleman, and we'll talk about this before, there's a gentleman who called me and say, people have come into my home. I saw call police. He said, no, they come through the walls, they sit down, there's 3 of them, and they abuse me, they verbally abuse me. He said, they go away when I do a crossword, and I was thinking, okay, I remember what Mark told me, schizophrenia, but I'm not a psychologist. I can't say to someone, this has happened to you, I recommend you do this. This poor guy has been to see a priest, an exorcism, a witch, numerous mediums to come round, bless the house, get rid of these spirits, but they would never go away. So I rang up Carl Williams at the university and said, Carl, I'm in a bit responsible, come with me please and hold my hand when we speak to the witness, because there's nothing more frightening than telling someone that they're ill. Now, I can't give that diagnosis. I recognise the symptoms from what I heard. I said, Carl, I'll leave it for you to do what you have to do. He sat there, and he advised them to go and see their GP, explained what schizophrenia is about. He said, don't worry. He said, look, I know that people associate mental illness with being locked up in the loony bin, but that's not going to happen to you. They'll give you some medication, wouldn't worry about it, but these people will go away. Now, can you imagine if I was an investigator without that sort of knowledge, without that sort of background? I'd be bringing in, I don't know, a different form of exorcist, a demonologist perhaps, and through that sort of process you can actually make the situation worse, because what's worse is a person who doesn't have knowledge of the phenomena, B, they're living in a destructive environment and they're living there on a day-to-day basis, particularly when we were talking about the case of the woman who believed that her abusive father was haunting the home. And if you have those things, can you imagine how terrified the person is? And a witness, an investigator, needs to have a sense of responsibility for the care of the witness. I don't mean, lift them and look after them, but just be responsible with how you interview them and with the approach to take to a case. You need as much common sense as possible and to treat them like a human being instead of like a guinea pig or a lab experiment. And I think in that sense, treat them as people, and as an investigator, if you're not sure, get a colleague or speak to a professional. And before we do that, I mean, we have got a good network of colleagues, professional colleagues who can help us.
Yes, 1 second, Heather.
Ties in with what Tony has been talking about. The idea of UFO investigation is actually crucial when it's conducted, particularly in what are known as high strangeness cases. And I absolutely would like to say that Tony's every point he's made is very, very, very valid. We have a responsibility, and it's a big one, when we are conducting UFO investigation, and particularly within our organisation. And it's very, very important and crucial to remember that you are dealing with the human mind at times. And there are things that can become outside of our remit. There are certainly, on occasion, mental health issues involved. And we do have to be very, very careful how we follow these investigations up. And without a doubt, there have been major mistakes made within UFO investigation. We try to, within U4, as much as possible, we must operate within our code of practice. We do, as Tony pointed out, have a moratorium on hypnosis. There's been all kinds of problems with it, and I've experienced them too. So what Tony has said, that last part, is terribly important to remember if anyone is interested in actively pursuing investigation into claims of UFOs, particularly in the more exotic claims and the high strangeness claims. Sorry to take up that bit of your time.
I've just got one little bit to add to answer your question again. It's also that there's another problem, which is witness-led investigations, where the witness is allowed to lead their own investigations. And in the 90s, we had something called witness support groups. I created one in Merseyside. It was a big mistake. Ken Phillips had created one in London. The whole idea was to provide a group of people with just support. It wasn't about bringing anybody else in. It was to provide confidentiality so that people could sit down over a cup of tea. It became a social thing. That was part of it, because people need to understand that it's a bizarre experience. It can be quite traumatic, but you need to know that you're normal. You're not going off your rocker. And so when they speak to other people and they say, "Oh, that happened to you," I go, "For that, I'm all right. It's okay. I don't know what happened, but I can accept that something's happened to me. I feel normal." But what happened in both groups, certainly in the Merseyside group, is that without consulting myself or Mark, they brought in hypnotherapists to hypnotise them all, and it was done like a sort of party event. You know the way parties in the 19th century would bring up the Ouija boards and contact the spirits? It was a game. And in the late 20th century, it wasn't that, it was hypnosis. And it became very, very dangerous, because what it led then is that people were sharing narratives. It changed their experience, and it was basically, it was embellishing their own stories. They were imagining things, and adding new bits of information which wasn't there before. And I came back and I said, I had a meeting with them, and I said, "That's it, the group's finished. Mara's removing it. Before it's removing its official support, I'm having nothing to do with it." because what I can see in the next 10, 20 years is possibly a backlash against the abduction movement in the States, like Bud Hopkins possibly, with the way that I have to agree to disagree with some of you perhaps if you believe in the abduction narrative as has been explicitly stated in the States of Bud Hopkins and Jacobs. I totally disagree with what's happened there. I know people do have genuine experiences, and I will never take anything away from that. But it's the way that's being interpreted and the way witnesses are being told this has happened to you. The witnesses need to find out for themselves. That's the end of it. Thank you.
Well done, Tony. Excellent presentation. Yeah, a very good, thorough presentation. Thanks, Tony.